The Committee of the Whole is called to order. Materials for the Committee of the Whole are in the shared session Google Drive folder labeled 9/27/22 Committee of the Whole. Proposed amendments must be submitted in writing to the clerk via email 36glsession@gmail.com. Amendments not in writing will be called out of order. Rules of engagement. There will be 3 rounds for discussion. We'll have 2 rounds of questions for the panel, with each senator allotted 5 minutes for questions, not including responses. Time to speak may not be yielded from more than one member to another. A member who yields that member's time on a question yields all of that member's time on that question and may not later speak, even if all the time yielded was not used. After the completion of the 2 rounds of questions, panelists will be excused. Third round is for amendments or comments to the bill. After we complete discussion of the bill, I will allow the sponsor to close and will entertain a motion for the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole, followed by a motion to rise from the Committee of the Whole, at which time I will report out the bill as recommended by the Committee of the Whole. So we will begin with discussions on Bill number 259-36 LS as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, and Energy Utilities and the Arts. This is the Octanguma Group Use Manumku Accommodations Incentive Act, an act to add a new Article 3 to Chapter 58, Title 12, Guam Code Annotated, relative to establishing new special qualifying certificate incentives for the development of elderly residential living housing comprising of independent living, assisted care, and nursing home accommodations. And now I'd like to call upon the panel guests and for the Sergeant at Arms to swear them in and for their introduction.
Please rise and raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay. Mr. Chair, under oath, you may proceed.
Thank you. And now, if the panel members could introduce themselves, beginning to my left.
Stephen Guerrero, Director of Office of Finance and Budget.
Daphne Shimizu, the Director of the Department of Revenue and Taxation.
Good morning. Melanie Mendiola, the Guam Economic Development Authority, an Administrator and CEO.
Hafide, good morning. Matthew Baza, the Business and Economic Development Supervisor at GIDA.
All right, thank you very much. And at this time, I will call upon the sponsor of the measure for her opening statement. Senator Taitagui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to you. Good morning to the panel. Thank you so much for accommodating this body and being here today to answer any of our questions. Mr. Chair, I know you've already opened with the name of the bill, 259-36, Octanguma, and GUMA stands for Group Use Manumku Accommodations for those who are listening. Mr. Chair, Bill 259, as amended, proposes to encourage and incentivize the development of elderly housing accommodations, which are able to support independent living, assisted living, and nursing home communities. If approved, Bill 259 authorizes qualified investors to receive a 100% BPT exemption for 20 years, and a 75% income tax rebate for 20 years, a 100% real property tax abatement for 20 years, and 100% use tax exemption, which must be claimed within a year after issuance of an occupancy permit. Mr. Chair, according to the data that was provided in October 2021, to the Senior Housing Task Force, which was created through Public Law 35-104. There were 12,700 individuals and families living in various GURA public housing, and 1,067 of them are 55 years and older, representing about 8.4% of those living in public housing. Moreover, there were 408 seniors on GURA's wait list for public housing, representing 14.2% of that wait list. According to the Senior Housing Task Force, the data provided as of October 2021 does not account for senior citizens living with family members. Mr. Chair, the information reveals the serious dilemma Guam faces as we do not have an assisted living facility on Guam, and our last elderly community is Summer Homes in Dedido, which is designed as an independent living community similar to apartments, but for able-bodied Manamku. Prior to the completion of Summer Homes is St. Dominic's, which was built in 1987 as a nursing home development with 49 independent rooms. To make matters worse and even more difficult, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, by 2034, for the first time in our nation's history, adults age 65 and older are expected to outnumber children. And as the US population grows older, states and local communities, including Guam, are exploring policies to ease the transition and offer support infrastructure for our Manamku. According to the NCSL, about half of Americans over 65 are predicted to need some level of long-term health-related services and support. Some older adults also face economic constraints due to limited retirement resources, and increased age is associated with higher rates of poverty, ranging from 9% for ages 65 to 74, 14% for ages 85 and older. Mr. Chair, I would like to thank the Legal Bureau and the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, Energy, Utilities, and the Arts for their assistance in reviewing Bill 259, and for conducting a public hearing a few months ago where representatives from GIDA and Mr. Carlos Camacho of Ironwood Housing offered supportive testimony. As many of us are aware, Mr. Camacho has many years of experience in development of affordable housing communities, and through his efforts, have moved forward on policies that has helped support Guamanians realize the American dream. I thank Mr. Camacho for continuing to provide insight and recommendations on this and other housing-related legislation. Mr. Chair, I also had a chance to discuss the efforts behind Bill 259 with other stakeholders, including Mark McManus, who is part of a housing consortium focused on elderly housing development. Mr. Chair, the bill as amended reflects references to the Guam Code annotated as suggested by the Legal Bureau, and it removes the phrase single-family dwellings, thereby focusing efforts on multiple housing units that can assist as many of our Manamku that can be accommodated in these housing facilities if they choose so. Mr. Chair, I would like to spend a moment to address a few issues that were brought up during the public hearing on this proposal specific to the definition of affordable and developer, and a suggestion by GIDA for the bill to include a minimum investment threshold in either a dollar amount or minimum number of units served in order to validate the efficiency of the special QC program. For the record, my office reached out to GIDA for any amendments they'd like to include to Bill 25. However, the agency has yet to provide their recommendations, which I'm hoping today they will provide some assistance if needed to make this bill stronger. Notwithstanding a lack of the follow-through on the part, I offered the term developer defined in Bill 259 to mean, quote, or the meaning of developer, the individual partnership, corporation, association, or other person who develops land through construction and becomes the owner of an elderly housing residential living establishment. So it's basically straightforward and ambiguous. The term affordable, defined in Bill 259 to mean up to 115% and less of the medium income average threshold where rental dwellings are deemed affordable if an annual rent does not exceed 30% of the maximum income level for low-income households adjusted for household size. This opens the door, Mr. Chair, for more individuals and households with elderly family members to become eligible for housing, consistent with income limits that are published annually by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. For the benefit of my colleagues and the listening audience, the adjusted income limits for 2022 run from very low income, one person, at $38,150, to moderate income, one person, at $103,500, to very low income, 8 in a household, at $50,400, to moderate income, 8 in a household, at $136,000. I provided my colleagues, as well as the panel, testimony of Mr. Camacho's testimony, which he gives a view of this type of scale and format tablet to explain under the USDA their consideration of what is considered income, very low income to moderate income, which is adjusted on a yearly basis. Mr. Chair, regarding the suggestion by Gita to include a minimum investment threshold in either a dollar amount or minimum number of units served in order to validate the efficiency of the QC program, I offered that the development of elderly housing, which blends independent, assisted living, and nursing communities, would be a new area for Guam, and that policy should be implemented right now to attract companies that may be willing to invest millions of dollars that are needed, because GovGuam simply doesn't have the resources to construct and manage these much-needed housing communities. Additionally, please take note that Gita is authorized by this measure through Section 58305F to negotiate the terms of the qualifying certificate. This provision recognizes the critical role Gita serves in executing and monitoring existing QC programs. Bill 259 anticipates the agency will also exercise the same due diligence through its anticipated adoption of program rules and guidelines. This will help and succeed in the proposed elderly housing QC, and that the agency will submit policy recommendations to the legislature, if any, which may be required going forward. I also agree at this point that we should establish a cap on the amount of tax incentives that may be authorized, especially at a time when the impacts of inflation have only intensified, with the price of basically everything going up by an average of 8% over the last 12 months. With the energy index alone increasing at an average of 23.8% for the last year, according to the August 2022 Consumer Price Index summary. Additionally, Bill 259, as amended, includes a sunset provision allowing for the tax program to run for at least 10 years. And the Gita board, at its discretion, will, with the input from the legislature, GURA, public health, the governor, and the community, shall re-examine the effectiveness and need for the program going forward. Mr. Chair, if approved, this bill will provide a vehicle to stimulate the private sector to develop and operate elderly communities, placing management responsibilities in the hands of competent nonprofit private operators, as nonprofit operating Manumku communities are able to run after additional federal funding that our government is not able to seek. Mr. Chair, Bill 25 is an opportunity for the private sector to offset elderly housing and care costs, becoming more affordable for our Manumku living on a fixed income. And Mr. Chair, lastly, Bill 259, as amended, prioritizes the development of Manumku facilities and homes which have been absent over the last 35 years. Perhaps one day, some of us here in this legislature who are blessed to reach and enjoy our twilight years may find ourselves as residents in such a community. So I ask, Mr. Chair, that if my colleagues to please support this measure, and looking forward to any questions and strengthen this legislation. So, si dus masi, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Taitigui. We'll now begin our first round of questions, and we will actually begin here in the front row. If I can start with Senator Dueñas.
Si dus masi, Mr. Chairman. I had a chance to attend the public hearing on this measure, and there was significant favorable response. I guess maybe in the author's opening, I would maybe just go to Gita first and see if, since the time has elapsed from the public hearing until now, are there any findings or any recommendations that you have at this time?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. We support the bill. We had discussion about our comment about affordable, and seeing as Gita is not the authority on housing, what we were back and forth about was, should the definition of affordable potentially be codified, or should it be something that can be determined at the program development level? And it was something that we had discussed that we could. This could be something that is done in conjunction. So after the bill's passage, God willing, we could take this and develop the program and utilize the widely accepted definition. We like Micronesia Community's definition. We also, the definition as stated in the bill looks fine as well. What we would likely do is consult GURA. What is the most, in the absence of consulting GURA at this point in time, or during the bill's discussion, in the absence of consulting GURA, who is the true expert on housing, we would probably go down that road at the time of the bill's passage.
So, in essence, what I'm getting from you then is you see this, if I'm understanding it right, as more or less a template going forward for this kind of, I don't know if I'd use niche, but definitely outside of the standard affordable housing model, particularly geared towards seniors. I know many of us who travel and have family abroad, I mentioned this during the public hearing. I know Washington State and others, many states, but particularly Washington State, I've seen a lot of these models, and they work very well. So would I be right in basically classifying that you would take this template then and then move it forward, going and working with the partners and establishing sort of a development plan?
That's correct, Senator, because especially what you'll see is by codifying an affordable definition here, and I'm not saying that this will happen, but you may box yourself in to some extent in as far as the movement of housing has been very volatile across the United States. So one of the discussions, so in the bill right now it says 30% of the maximum income level. If you look at a city like Los Angeles or New York City, people are spending well over 30% of their income on housing, right? And so we believe that the definition was, well, for us, it was hard for us to weigh in, and so we defer to the experts. And in the development of the program, what I would likely do, the way that we would construct it is we would research if, in the absence of GURA having anything available for us to utilize, so similar to how public health in their child care standards, at one point in time, public health was mirroring like Maryland for whatever reason. And we said, Guam is a little bit more similar to Hawaii, for example, so should we look at modifying it and making it look like Hawaii? That was flexibility that proved to be beneficial for us and or for the people of Guam at large, what we found. And so with that flexibility, we think that can be translated here very nicely. And then we are grateful that the senator did address the minimum housing with the multiple family dwelling discussion. We did notice what we believe to be a typo, and this is on page 8, line 14. A hotel shall not be considered a multiple family dwelling provided that the developer intends to substantially renovate the hotel use for elderly housing. The way I read that is that a hotel could potentially be converted to elder use. So for me, readability-wise, I would just perhaps say something like, a hotel shall not be considered a multiple family dwelling unless the developer intends to substantially renovate the hotel use for elderly housing. So we appreciate that the author made some distinction about multiple units. And let me see. We did have some other comments about timelines, but otherwise, it looks good. Looks good to us. Very well written.
Thank you, Mel. This is probably already understood, but I think maybe for just an on-the-record comment, Daphne, Director of Rev and Tax, are there any tax implications that would need any type of adjustment in this bill or not? I'm sure probably not, but I think I would be absent if I didn't at least ask the question.
Right, and so with regards to, and as we reviewed the bill, we looked back at some of the other QC programs, for example, the special hotel QC, to see how this may compare. And the language, in terms of the tax portion, the exemptions, the rebates are similar to what we've seen in other areas for QCs. I did mention that to Mel earlier that on page 11, line 12, it might be helpful, just because it doesn't specifically say it's a BPT exemption, just to state that it's actual exemption, but outside of that, in the tax section, again.
Abatement.
Yeah, or abatement, whatever it is that is the desire of the body, because I do see that in some areas there's a rebate, but whatever it is that the desire of the body, just so that it's clear what exactly whether it's an abatement, an exemption, or a rebate, what they are. But again, these mirror what we see in other qualifying certificates, whether for insurance or for the special hotel QC, which we were looking at. And so we didn't have a concern about the way that the language is structured for the taxes.
And maybe just one final follow-up with Gita, and thank you, Daphne. In all of the models that Gita works at in different kind of economic models, QCs, things that kind of affect the community, has this been or on the list, I guess, if you will, meaning, I guess what I'm looking for is there a demonstration of need, or is it build it and they will come kind of approach? Or just wanted to kind of dig down a little bit more to see if this has been on Gita's radar, or it's been addressed before within the institution.
Thank you, sir. I don't believe that we don't have an abundance of developers seeking this type of abatement. So, for example, in the last several years, we've been visited by a number of solar industry types of individuals seeking an abatement for different types of operations. However, there has been a long-standing observation, and I think those were articulated very well earlier by Senator Taitigui, that affordable housing in and of itself is a big issue. And that's something that the GITA board and GITA has looked at from the perspective of affordable homes. So we do have an affordable homes QC. That QC had been largely inactive for the last 15 or so years, and we approved it recently. And that was a similar looking QC where it provided abatements and rebates to a developer who would then pass on the savings to the beneficiary. Now, the other observation I wanted to make was these tax incentives occur at the state or territorial level, also build on tax incentives that occur at the federal level. So Carlos Camacho, earlier, who weighed in at the public hearing and has conversations with many here. There's the low-income housing tax credits and other federal programs that come out. Oftentimes, there's rebates from there as well. So what we would likely do is, what you want to make sure of is that you're not doubling up tax benefits. You don't double rebate, right? And so with LIHTC and affordable housing, the benefits are strictly the local taxes, and then the low-income housing tax credits that are used to build the development. That's a different kind of pot of money. So just something to keep in mind. And certain states, from a competitive angle, I've mentioned this to the body before, we do look at other states and jurisdictions or other countries and what they're doing with regard to tax incentives. States that offer tax incentives that complement federal tax incentives, that seems to be a really nice model. That seems to be a really nice model that shows that the state has real commitment to echoing this nationally kind of observed problem, right, or issue.
Yeah, because just in closing, one of the recent things I've encountered, and I was kind of a surprise to me, I've had constituents come to me, and I visited one over the weekend where there is some of our population now that basically have resources, but the family unit, either they're busy or different things are going on, and more of an assisted living type of approach, right? So maybe this is where the blend can come in terms of services, because they, like I said, they can make rent, they're in apartments most of the time and the like, but then again, they're detached from services, right? So maybe this may be an opportunity as well. So thank you, Mel, and thank you, Daphne, for your answering these questions. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Dueñas. Senator Mullen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel. You were also discussing the overall the shortages of homes overall. So this bill is specific for seniors, the Mononcos, which is important too. But could you see this if this would have included new home constructions or multi-family dwelling homes, or even renovations to the expansion of apartments too, to make it all-inclusive, which would also assist in the Mononcos as well? How would you see that from your position?
We currently have a qualifying certificate program called the Affordable Housing QC. That's the one that we recently approved. So I do believe that services the general market for affordable housing.
Would that duplicate, not duplicate, but following the same language what's in this current bill as well?
It's an older program, so I noticed that some of the language here mirrors some of the language of more recent QCs, including the Special Hotel QC. And so the Affordable Housing QC is a little bit older of a QC, so there are ways that the Affordable Housing QC language is different than this, but abatement-wise, if you just give me a moment. Matt, can you?
Yeah, so the existing Affordable Housing QC law basically provides a tax rebate of 100% on income and a tax abatement of 100% of the BPT on gross receipts and income derived from constructing the home, so the affordable housing unit. The law does mandate that there's a minimum of 25 built at any given time. So if a beneficiary does get an affordable housing QC, they're mandated to construct at least 25 units in order to get the tax benefit. The tax benefit is on the income and revenue received from constructing it. So in the case of like a contractor, if they're building 25 units that's considered affordable, then they get tax benefits on that construction. It's supposed to make the cost of construction a little bit cheaper so that they can either rent or sell the unit at an affordable rate as defined by the authority that's put in their QC. This one, like Mel did say, is closer to the Special Hotel QC, and I think it's because it's for a very specific type of housing unit where there will be more than likely other services provided to either the homeowner if it is sold or the tenant if it's rented out. So it's more, this is more like operating a business.
Develop and operate.
Yeah.
Develop and operate.
Yeah, this is like developing and operating a business where the person will probably more than likely have other services that they're paying for, which will be included in either the rent or a common area fee or some other structure. So this is more like the special hotel QC where they're getting a benefit equal to a percentage of the investment for building and then owning and operating that type of facility. So they are a little bit different. One is main on to reduce the cost of construction overall, so that if the unit is sold or rented, it's more affordable. This one is to provide an incentive for someone to build and operate this type of facility.
Thank you, that's really helpful, but also I think what I'm looking at in the future here, something we'll have a discussion on further, is individual homes, not massive, 25 homes at a time, but more of individual homes to get things going in that way too. So we'll be talking some more on that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Torres.
Thank you to the panel for the very informative discussion about this bill. In looking at the tax rebates, exemptions, and abatements, you mentioned that they are typical, they're ordinary of what is offered. And what concerns me generally about policy and development on Guam is it seems that nothing can be done on Guam without this kind of a QC being afforded to the developers. At some point, you know, the concern for the erosion of a potential tax contribution, I think, is very real, and that's the sort of thing that many of us gauge is at some point, you know, where do you draw the line in terms of giving away all of what could be potential tax collections, including BPT and income tax and use tax. So that's always a concern. But what I wanted to ask is, I understand where this is going, and I understand the end game is to provide for development. But Mel, has there been any consideration to when these sorts of things are developed, whether they in fact are sustainable and whether they meet the Guam model? And I know that the affordability was one thing that many of us were concerned about, and Micronesian community addressed that, what their threshold would be. But even with that, even assuming that there is an affordability threshold, do we also have to then marry whether this concept of an assisted living is even ripe for Guam? Like, will, for example, public health come into play? Will there be corresponding federal programs that will cover the cost of assisted living or the expenses of being able to reside in such a residence, in such a facility? I ask that question because from my personal experience and knowledge of these assisted living facilities, they are hardly affordable. And many of them, the models that I've seen throughout the states, in the capacity that we anticipate that they are going to function, they really are only more suited to the privileged and and those whose families have the fortunes to pay that monthly expenses. But in looking at this and in granting QCs, is there also a gauge that GITA has with regard to the true operations and affordability? Is it a sustainable model for Guam? Has that been vetted out in terms of the staffing potential and also the ability for those in the income brackets to rent these places?
I think that's a very valid question, Senator. From the perspective of the erosion of the tax base, this particular legislation does address the cap of 30% of the total construction cost. And because the minimum size is relatively small from a 3-unit development and upward, then we like the cap because the cap then helps us to assess the tax impact, and that can be reported. It could be quantified, and so if you asked us for, right now, any legislator can ask GITA for a list of outstanding tax credits, and we can provide that to you. It's harder with a qualifying certificate because you're talking about future exemptions that may or may not have a cap associated with them, depending on the QC and how it was written, depending on how which QC you're referring. With regard to the, I agree with you, and I do believe that that has to be vetted well, because you're absolutely right, Senator. I know that public health, which is probably the most, just as GURA is the most appropriate in dealing with issues of housing, public health is generally the most appropriate in dealing with issues of senior care. And public health does have a number of services. I mean, just my general familiarity with them is that they have a number of services available from Manamco, but how much of that really has a bottom line impact on their cost of living, I'm not sure. How much Meals on Wheels, for example, which is a very good program that they have here in Guam, but beyond that, I know that a lot of senior living utilize a lot of different pots of money to be able to make it affordable, and so that is not something that GITA has taken on. It's something I think that public health would be well suited to address, what the status quo of what's available to seniors for a situation like this.
And I bring that up because what we're aiming at is a facility that can service the community, a community at different income brackets. And if we're going to give these sorts of considerations in taxes, we want to make sure that it can, in fact, bleed into the low income. And many of the models that I've seen don't reach that threshold, and that's what I worry about. But I think more than anything with the QC program, too, what concerns me from past discussions on the floor is the QCs are treated as renewable. At the expiration of the QC term, an applicant can come in and seek a new QC and restart that clock. So the benefit of tax exemptions and such goes in perpetuity, more or less. And that's the part that I worry about, is at some point when you give someone the advantage of developing and there's a windfall to them, that windfall can in fact continue. And we see that a lot with the wholesalers right now in Guam, where many of the wealthiest on Guam are those wholesalers that have had those QC considerations, who have then come in at the end of the term and reapplied as though they were a brand new startup when in fact they're well established. So I think at some point that really has to be a policy on Guam where we decide at some point where we give upstart advantages and tax rebates and exemptions, but then when someone is established, that consideration falls off. But thank you for the comment. I think that when we're looking at what we can do to truly benefit the community, the other half of it, the actual service of the facility, I think is something that, a discussion that also needs to be brought up. Thank you.
Speaker Talahi, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the panel for being here and providing this information for us on this bill. I think there's no debate as to the need. I think, yeah, what's the way to go on this, of course, is we should keep trying every way possible to try to find a way to meet this need. So I just want to get some basics put down. First of all, the fiscal note, was long and it described the program, but it didn't really give any potential impact except for the sentence that says, applying any tax credits to any of the above-mentioned taxes will likely result in reduced financial resources for other government programs and services. So it's not really an estimate or any type of calculation or cost-benefit analysis. We're not able to do that because we have no estimates of what types of revenue we might be foregoing. So I wanted to ask OFB if what their analysis of this was. I don't have a copy of that, and what their analysis of the fiscal impacts of this bill are, or this type of a program.
Yes, Speaker. Unfortunately, this bill wasn't submitted to OFB for a fiscal note on our part. I believe the fiscal note you're referring to is the fiscal note that was prepared by BBMR.
That's correct. I read BBMR's note, and I'm asking
Yes.
OFB if they have a fiscal impact
So
analysis.
I was just told about this yesterday. So we went away and actually did a real quick assessment, looking at least for the impact it would have on FY 22 and FY 23. We don't see any fiscal impact it would have on the revenues for both those fiscal years. The only impact we would note is that any potential revenues being generated by the bill could have a potential loss as a result of providing these rebates on these various taxes. But we won't know the amount until we find out more information as, of course, construction costs, number of clients, et cetera, et cetera. So unless we get the data, it'd be hard for us to determine any fiscal impact in terms of a dollar amount at this point.
Well, I know we could wait for data after the fact, but isn't there any way to do an analysis prior so that we can do a cost-benefit analysis, you know, as a government? Like if we built this many units, we would be giving an approximate amount of taxes, and I don't know, but otherwise, that's the decision on us, right? It's really the only, otherwise we should say, yes, give QCs all the time, but we have to also weigh what we lose in revenue, right? And where we have put that revenue, and is it a more of a priority or less, right? And then those are policy decisions. But I don't, you know, I'm all for this bill, but I don't feel comfortable without any type of estimate of what we're looking at, you know, like if we built one, you know, unit of 25 or more, or 25, since that was one of the minimums proposed, then, you know, what would that model look like? Just that. I mean, I just want to know what we're talking about in this tax revenue losses. Okay, so what about, all right, and then Gita, at the hearing, and you talked about it this morning as well, you had recommended that we better define affordable and developer. And then Micronesia community suggested that we tie affordable into what the USDA or HUD describes, I guess, right? Or the parameters that they use. And then you also said something about using other federal program parameters. Are we able to merge these into this bill immediately or come up with language like that?
Madam Speaker, what I would do is likely merge into the bill the language that the GITA shall incorporate affordability standards mirroring the common standards of GURA, or something to the effect of starting with GURA and from there, and that should be incorporated into the QC program prior to its launch. I noticed that there was something within 30 days, GITA shall do, what is it, the fees and application. Yes. No. Not the negotiations, from the development of the application and the material, the supporting materials and all of that. I think it could be articulated in the law that when GITA develops all of this, that they shall define affordable as based on, after consultation with the housing experts, including GURA, et cetera.
And in that way, Speaker, it allows that if certain economic conditions change, that you know, the GITA can reevaluate and adjust that threshold, so that we're not locked into one threshold, and then it becomes cost prohibitive for anyone to even consider investing in something like this because now it's too low or something to that effect?
So an example I'll give is Carlos, for example, states the HUD USDA threshold. There could be programs out there that utilize a different, they'll say, we're going to use the federal poverty level instead. And so usually you want to go with something that is, that will maximize the impact to the ultimate beneficiaries of the project. And so this is why we would suggest, perhaps it's something that's a little more flexible in the legislation that would be given GITA the flexibility to make that adjustment as necessary.
All right. Thank you. Doesn't GITA have a, like a committee on senior housing? Or what do they call it, assisted living?
We did, yes, Speaker, we did start up an assisted living subcommittee. That was led by one of our former directors, Gia Ramos, and upon her departure from GITA, we inherited the committee, or we continued on with the committee. It was primarily, her main focus, however, was the application of Medicaid, MIP, and Medicare towards costs including St. Dominic's home care, et cetera. That was really her focus and her charge to the GITA staff in our research for seniors.
Yeah, I think that research is important, as to my colleague, the previous speaker's discussion as to, the whole model, right? And so whatever, of course, can be covered by Medicare, Medicaid, would assist, and that is really where the issues that we're having right now is we do not have coverage, for example, at St. Dominic's, and then we have long-term patients at the SNU, also probably not covered. I'm not sure, but I know that it's that's really a key. But I am hoping that we will, with the work of GITA and public health, of course, and everyone, that we can build these. And the developer, it looks like the model that this bill proposes is that there's going to be a developer, as you said, owner, right, who's going to run this. So that they have to have their own model in mind before they build or apply, I would think, right? Okay. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Speaker Talahi. Senator Peres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning to the panel. One of the questions I asked during the public hearing regards to, I guess, compliance in regards to standard of care for assisted living homes. And, the bill does mention that there has to be annual compliance, but I'm just wondering if that language could be strengthened. I know currently we don't have any types of regulations in place for the type of care that's required, I believe. So, maybe if you can weigh in on that.
Senator, we wanted to kind of speak to how we do the annual compliance for our hotels as related to primarily, GITA is here to assess whether or not this remains eligible for an abatement or a rebate. And that abatement or rebate is limited to the 30%. And so our abatement or rebate, when it comes to hotels, first, the use tax exemption. Is there use on this? Yes, the use tax exemption has to do with the landing of materials in Guam. So we make sure that the receipts match or the bill of lading and the receipts, what they've expended. That is what can be utilized to apply for their use tax. Then with this one, you have the income tax abatement and the BPT abatement, the income tax rebate and the BPT abatement. From there, our standards primarily are the audited financials, the ongoing compliance with the QC in as far as any minimum thresholds we place for employment, and anything else?
And also, I mean, in general, and also to add to that, first and foremost, we do look at making sure that the beneficiary is able to properly claim the abatement, rebate, or exemption. So that means we do look a lot at, since there's an income tax benefit here, audited financials, we look at all of those sort of things. But further than that, the QC law does also state that in order for a beneficiary to remain eligible to receive benefits, they need to, one, be duly licensed and maintain a license, and two, comply with all applicable laws, rules, regulations of not only the authority, but Guam as a whole. So, for example, if one of the beneficiaries under this program is to be like an assisted living facility, and if there's specific licenses that they need to maintain to be that kind of facility, GITA would of course be like, you need to provide proof that you're still an active assisted living facility of this type, that you have a valid license to operate, that there's no issues with like a clearance from public health for this, you've maintained your ADA compliance, all those sort of things. If they're non-compliant with one aspect of the QC, or even with some aspect of the law that's crucial to their operations of their business, they are considered non-compliant in total, and they're not able to claim any benefits for that tax year. They would have to cure it. So GITA really looks at licensing is one of the things we always look at. Are they maintaining the licenses they need to operate the business? And as long as if public health signs off on it and they still have their license, GITA makes says, okay, they're still licensed by the proper regulatory agency to operate as an assisted living facility or a full care facility or whatnot.
Okay, so just to mirror what you were saying, basically, you're looking at QC compliance, not healthcare compliance. Okay, and that would probably be, we probably need to strengthen that part in the law, I think, to assure that this is successful, because the last thing that we want is, we build this beautiful structure, right? But then what happens within that structure, right? Is the standard of care up to par? And also, I think that, maintenance, is this something that's important to put into QC law to ensure that maintenance is kept up so that the facility is in good working order? Is this something that, in your research or understanding of assisted living care facilities, is there subsidies that are needed to ensure that the facility is still good throughout the years of the 20 years?
The annual upkeep and maintenance is likely outside the scope of the QC. If this particular QC, in its most simple form, is a landlord-tenant arrangement, in order for a landlord to renew their license on an annual basis, they still have to, to get their license to start, they have to have clearances from DPW and fire and so on and so forth. To renew, they're subject to meeting compliance with those same regulations. Now, does that mean that GFD or DPW are going out to inspect every year? Not necessarily. But there is an understanding that as long as you're maintaining that license, that you're maintaining those same standards. I would caution against replication within the law. That would be double work, double charges, double efforts outside the scope of what's traditionally done within a qualifying certificate, although that's your it's your call. But you might go down developing standards of how we maintain facilities. That's not really, it's not typical, not something that I've seen in any QC legislation, not something that I see in, not something we see in QC programs that we have in general.
All right, thank you. And then in regards to just a general question about QCs, has there been any kind of tracking or monitoring to ensure that the government is getting the return on investment?
The existing qualifying certificates, for the most part, have been the active qualifying certificates that still exist. There's maybe there are three hotels and a number of sort of individual businesses. There's the Guam Brewery and some insurance companies as well. With regard to the return on investment, I think that the return on investment, the hotel industry was built on the qualifying certificate, and so therein lies the evidence of the effectiveness of the qualifying certificate program. Going forward, as we look at other industries, I think that that's something that is very valid to track the economic impact of the various QC programs. But the QC programs that Gita was promoting for the better part of the last 20 years or 30 years has been the hotel QC. And so the economic impact of tourism is probably the biggest evidence of the economic impact of the QC. But beyond that, there's no one industry that I would point to that's received. There have been QCs that have been received by industries. If you look at the minutes of Gita in 1972, they gave out QCs to a watchmaker, a clothing manufacturer. Clearly, those industries no longer exist. So to some extent, QCs are introduced to stimulate a new industry. Sometimes the new industry takes, sometimes for whatever reason it doesn't. Where you do want to see the economic impact is when you're trying to continue a QC program. So Senator Taitigui wrote into this a sunset provision of 10 years with a 5-year extension. So this is not an evergreen QC that's supposed to be good forever. It's supposed to be 10 years. We all know that there's no real senior living facility. The intent of the law was to create a private senior living facility. I don't know of any at the current time. And so I think that we could probably assess the impact once the QC has had a chance to get some applicants in.
Appreciate the response. So yeah, this is, I did co-sponsor the bill because I do believe in this. And in fact, if we can, one of the visions that I had was, during the time of COVID, there was, lack of tourism. And what if we can, renovate some of these hotels so that, there could be multiple revenue streams for hotel industry, right? So they can have the long-term guests, which can somehow be, the income coming from tourists can somehow leverage the long-term guests. So, I mean, that's something that, if we want to cushion the vagaries of the tourist industry, we need to develop a local industry in combination with what's coming in. So, yeah, that's maybe one of the ways that we can go forward with this. I guess perhaps the other question is, do you envision like smaller developers, let's say somebody who owns an apartment building and they want to maybe convert part of their units into assisted living facilities? Is there like a threshold, do you think, of what type of investor are we looking at? Or what type of investor are we attracting? And maybe do we need to diversify that so that, it's not just a one-size-fits-all kind of QC, but, there's all kinds of types of developers that can fulfill the need that our community has?
Right. This particular QC, Senator, it looks like it's an owner, it's a developer and operator type of model. And so I know that the minimum threshold on this was relatively small, and so 3, and so somebody could do what makes sense. However, one thing to look at is if a QC unit, if a landlord is specifically looking at developing and renting out 3 units for this specific purpose, while they may have these abatements available to them, they may not need these abatements in as far as they may already be subject to, for example, the expanded Dave Santos legislation that covers that could cover a relatively small landlord. So the 20 years, there is an annual compliance fee associated with this. And so if the annual compliance fee, I believe on our affordable housing QC, it's $1,000. So if there was an annual compliance fee of $1,000 on this, you'd want to make sure that it was worth it for a landlord to be paying the $1,000 to save the real property tax, which is already set relatively low for by national averages. Income tax and income tax and BPT. There'd be a bit of a balance there. So I don't envision this. This to me is tailored towards a larger developer, someone who has expertise in this very narrow field. And perhaps they could utilize partnerships with local owners of local property owners to invigorate derelict buildings, but I don't anticipate it being organically driven by a landlord who already has a specific model in mind. I don't envision it necessarily being enough to shift someone from one type of landlord to another.
Right. Thank you so much for the response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly welcome to our panel that's here with us this morning to discuss this bill. I wanted to ask Gita, I mean, I understand certainly from the questions of my colleagues here, but have you been approached by any interested companies that might be wanting to invest previously, or is this kind of like the first time this issue's come knocking at your door as a result of this legislation that Senator Taitigui has introduced, just in terms of where the market interest is out there?
Nothing recent that our business development, so business and economic development run by our manager Ed Camacho and our assistant manager Matt Baza here. They generally take all inquiries, general inquiries with regard to our QC programs. One thing that we have observed with QC programs is that new ones, when they're written about, reported about, sometimes that then prompts people to come and visit us. For example, Senator Rigel sponsored QC legislation to revamp our recycling QC. We're very happy to report that that particular QC has been utilized once already, and there's one in the pipeline right now. And so it was like revamping it, almost refreshing it, gave it a new face, and that then helped us promote and spread the word about that industry. So it could have that effect.
And out of the QCs that have been given, of course, historically, we always remember the ones that were being given for the hotels, and most recently, the legislature passed legislation that would allow for major renovations of existing hotels. Of course, we certainly want to make sure these facilities meet a certain standard, but can you just give us an overview of, I mean, you mentioned the recycling one that Senator Rigel had introduced, but are there other, just to give us an idea of the type of QCs perhaps that have already been issued, just so we get an idea of the type of programs that you're overseeing, you know, just where the market interest has been out there?
Certainly. So most developers, or rather, I would say 100% of hotel developers come to visit us. So anyone looking to develop a new hotel will come to visit Gita. We also recently had a major tourism attraction developer visit us and apply and receive a qualifying certificate for a multi-million-dollar investment in a tourism in an activity, an optional tour. Type of activity. There's been some work in the insurance was one of the first QC programs that was developed, that there was a moratorium in the previous administration specific to health insurance QCs. That insurance QC has been, there's still active QCs on the risk management, on the captive insurance side. That's another area that we're looking into. Any others, Matt? We have the brewery was an interesting one. It was a manufacturing microbrew, and we also have a tire recycling that is up for before the board, and we have a number of others in the pipeline. We have a really interesting. This has been a very interesting year for Gita in as far as the qualifying certificate letters of intent that we've received. So diverse industry that has shown interest in applying for tax abatements. So where the Gita board, or rather, I'm sorry, Gita has created a credit committee as part of the SOP of all QCs. We have like a credit committee, and the credit committee comes together. They look at they do their due diligence with regard to the applicant, what they're looking to do, how they're looking to carry out the activity, what their financials look like. They underwrite the financials, and based on that, that's how we quantify what the impact potentially could be of money that does not go into our tax base. That is then, in the last round with the board, that is then articulated to our board of directors, who then bear that in mind when they approve a qualifying certificate. What was the norm years ago was you give maximum benefit to anybody that comes in. They come in, they want 100%, 100%, 100%. We give 100% across the board because there's no reason not to, right? Was the argument. Nowadays, it's for us. We'd like to, when it comes to creating a report, we'd like to say, we've looked at what they're doing, their type of activity. This is the kind of cap. The special hotel QC is a perfect example of that. There's a cap. This particular legislation proposes a cap. The recycling QC doesn't have a cap. It's a minimum amount, but of waste that needs to be removed from the waste stream. But we don't think there should not be a cap because trash is evergreen. I mean, we always have garbage. And so as long as a company is able to get garbage out of our landfill, we think that that's something that should be given an abatement for the duration of their QC. So.
And with regards to this particular legislation, I mean, you elaborated, you don't really see a major issue of the ability of GITA to shift to implement this particular qualifying certificate program, certainly should this legislation pass and become law?
Yes, Senator, I think this should be fine. This looks a fair bit like our special hotel QC. In addition, it does share some similarities to our affordable housing QC. And so it looks similar to some programs we already have. There was one comment we wanted to make about page 12. It says that the authority shall have up to 30 days from the submittal of a completed application to approve or deny. That will need to be extended or removed, primarily because there are steps, including a public hearing, that all QC beneficiaries go through, so that must be publicly noticed. It goes to a board meeting, that's publicly noticed as well. So that's something that needs to be extended from the date of, I would probably just, I would remove the shall have up to 30 days from the submittal of a completed application. Or, we could always put something like, the authorities shall report within 30 days the status of the QC application, because we already do, in our board meetings, we already have a QC report, and so we could, within 30 days, update the status, have the status, a status update publicly available, and most especially available to the applicant.
So other than that, I mean, you don't anticipate any other issue with regards to the ability of GITA to implement this legislation?
No, Senator, looks okay.
Well, that's good to know. Mr. Chair, I just wanted to ask, are we going to be allowed another round to actually comment on the bill? Then I'll save that so that our panel doesn't have to
Yes, we'll have
to sit through that.
one more round of questions after this. This is still the first round. One more round for questions, so 2 rounds for questions. And then the third round will be for any amendments or final closing remarks on the.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you very much to the panel for responding to my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Brown. Senator Ada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here as well. Ms. Mendiola, I guess the abatements and the rebates and exemption, the 100% BPT for 20 years, the 75% for 20 years, and the 100%, is that standard for all QCs?
Senator, that's a very good question. It depends on the QC. It's not standard. However, there has been, what I tend to see in the different QCs is up to.
So this is not stating up to, this is saying 100%?
Right, correct.
So considering the size of a project, right, hotels, or they invest hundreds of millions of dollars into buildings, so that's perhaps why we have 100% abatement or 100% rebate, or on a project something like a senior assisted living, perhaps they would invest maybe 25 million. Do you think that 100% of the BPT for 20 years is reasonable, or do you think that it should actually be something that where, depending on the amount spent, we look at what the abatements or rebates or exemptions should be?
Yes, Senator. On this particular bill, there is, I believe, I was looking for the page, but there is a a cap on the abatement, or there's a cap of 30% of the development cost. So a $25 million development would call for no more than $8 million or so in abatements, rebates, and exemption. And so from there, whether or not it's 100% in 20 years or 80% in 20 years,
It still gives you the ability to go
it's
because
still-
of the cap.
that's correct. It caps it by the amount as opposed to the percentage allowed. What some QCs will allow for is, like a hotel, is 100%, oh no, I'm sorry, 75%. It cap in 8, the qualifying certificate terminates at that point in time because they've exhausted the abatements, rebates, and exemptions.
I see. And, you know, my colleague brought it up earlier about transfers or carryovers of QCs. Do you think in future legislation, or maybe that it should be stated in the legislation that the QCs shall not be transferable, or?
There's the only qualifying certificate in the books at the current time that allows for a renewal is insurance. And the purpose, I believe the legislative intent of allowing for that renewal is because the abatement, which is BPT, is passed on to the consumer of the insurance. It's not for an emerging market or a new industry. So I think that's a matter, I think that's certainly for your dialogue as our leaders. I don't think it needs to be taken off the table, because if the savings continues to be passed on to the beneficiaries, then I don't see why it wouldn't be renewed. Having said that, there is a cap on the benefit. So if they didn't draw down on their benefit in the course of the 20 years that's valid, then my question is, I don't know if the business would still be in business at the 20-year mark, right? I don't think so. So I don't think I would. I don't think it's an issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the only questions I had. The rest had been answered by my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Atta. Senator Talahi.
Let me just, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just thank the panel for showing up this morning. When we talk about QCs and developments and things like that, reducing taxes, we're talking about the advantage, and what satisfies the program is we're talking about the social stratification of society, and we're talking about the incentive that is given to some of the developers. And the QC, I would say, always will entice developers to be part of the program. So from what I hear, I heard a 30-day time frame to go through the process. Is the 30 days enough when we have to go through the process of introducing another bills and for you guys to come and testify regarding, is 30 days enough? I used to be a contractor, and at times 30 days is not enough time to prepare for everything else regarding any development. So maybe if that 30 days is not sufficient, maybe on the third term that we're going to speak is maybe one of us would ask for an amendment to that 30 days. I also want to thank the sponsor of this bill because this bill is a good bill. And let me tell you right now, it's a good bill, and I will support this bill. And all the information that you guys are providing us is totally satisfactory. So I just want to thank you, thank the panel for being so elaborate and confirming some of the issues that we have on hand. I want to thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Talahi. Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And thank you for the panel for being here today. I guess one question is Ms. Benjala, is there anything that's unique or extraordinary about the language in this bill relative to the way any other qualifying certificate program is laid out?
No, Senator, it looks pretty standard to us. We observed earlier that it looks similar to the special hotel. It also looks similar to our affordable housing. So it does have language from some of our other qualifying certificates, and so we're comfortable with, with notwithstanding some of the comments we made, such as the about the authority having 30 days to approve. That was the only one that was the one I think that we just called out to say that with the public notices involved, that might not be feasible. And so we do a monthly report. And that's not, and the monthly report is not something mandated by law. It's just something that GITA does for transparency and good practices. But that could be called out here and say GITA shall report monthly the status of any applicant's QC in this area, as opposed to, I think the 30 days is really to make sure that the agency is, on the ball about getting it done. And I assure you, GITA's on the ball trying to get it done. But there's just some timeframes in the middle that we are subject to, specifically the public hearing, where the public can weigh in about the project, as well as our board meeting, where the public can, or where the board meeting, which must be noticed. And our last board meeting, we weren't able, we had some emergencies, and we weren't able to get a quorum, so we had to postpone the meeting. And so things like that, those are administrative things that could cause problems. That's called out here in the law that I would suggest changing.
Okay. Mr. Guerrero, with regard to recognizing and based on the discussion, this is basically a whole new industry. And really has not affected the tax base or revenue base for the government in one way, shape, or form. So therefore, is it safe to say, safe to assume that, with this kind of industry, bringing it in, it will not have no immediate or negative impact on government revenues or government government revenue stream as we have it today?
Yes, Senator. The speaker kind of alluded to almost the same concerns that you were posing. My response to her that as far as FY22 and FY23, this proposed legislation will have no impact on the government revenue simply because those revenues have already been set and kind of like in place. Any potential revenues to be generated as a result of this particular program, of course, would be an addition on top of what we've already estimated and projected for those 2 fiscal years. With the rebates and abatements it's proposed in the bill, of course, would to some degree reduce the potential revenues that we could have generate should these percentage rebates and stuff were not part of the bill. If you took it 100%, of course, we take 100% of the costs. But right now, in its present form, it would be an additional revenue to the general fund in the long run, should this bill actually pass and the project actually gets off the ground.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you, Senator Bloss. Senator Titagui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I greatly appreciate all the questions that are being asked. It's about strengthening something that's very important, this legislation. I'd like to thank also Senator Terlahi, Peter Terlahi, as a co-sponsor. I'm glad, you and I, we're both Madame Kosir. We've got a lot of friends who know that they're going to need a facility like this, and someday we may too as well. Matt and Mel, can you please write this down? Because I just wanted to make sure as we, after this next round, that we prepare the amendments that was spoken about earlier, and I'll discuss some of this with my colleagues to ask if they would like to sponsor these amendments, but I'd be happy to print them up for my, with my staff. At page 11, line 12, page 8, line 14, page 11, line 14, page 12, line 13. Yeah, I took notes as we were going down on these areas in which there could be amendments being made to strengthen the bill and your concerns that you had. It was brought up earlier about the affordable section of this definition. I think as we work in this, Mel, the reason why we incorporated this template using HUD was because we wanted to be able to diversify the demographics of who stays in these facilities. That it had not only just those who, are of lower income, but middle class, which has always been left out of the equation of anything moving forward. The middle class. And I did not want to leave them out. So that's the reason why I incorporated these figures based on the HUD's demographic template of middle to low income. So I guess I'll talk to you about that to ensure that we can put any kind of language in there to make sure we utilize the HUD's template. The second one on multifamily homes, as you mentioned, thank you for bringing up the affordable QC, which was proffered by then Senator Tony Lamarena. And I think it's clear that this is for multi-use and not individual homes, which people have actually even the opportunity, as well, Mr. Chair, to receive a different grant to assist individuals in their homes on senior living assistance. So I think we've covered that when it comes to individual housing. As far as subsidies or anything that these companies who come to the island and build, utilizing their millions of dollars, of investment into Guam, that we're hoping because of the affordability section that allows 30% rebate for those on affordable and versus those at 25, that actually has a larger demographics of individuals to basically utilize these facilities. I think we're just trying to diversify, most importantly, and hopefully later on, as we see that the need, which we all know from Asia to the US, on our aging population, the need for these facilities, the need to address our high seniors and what happens to them as they get older, the inability to drive, they reach a threshold of no income whatsoever at one point other than what they get through Social Security. And if most of them are lucky, have retirement annuities as well, so that we can later on provide subsidies for these individuals to live in these facilities. It was mentioned about the financial impact. I think you've mentioned that, you brought that up very well, Mel, talking about that. An example of the $3 million that came from mischeated funds to assist in the housing that actually approximated about $115 million of impact to our island as far as additional revenue coming in from only $3 million. I was glad Senator Paris actually brought up senior tourism, because at one time before the pandemic, there was made mention of people owning condominiums, turning it into retirement facilities for people from Asia. Okay, we're almost done. Okay, other than that, I will be working on the amendments, right after the second round, Mr. Chair. So if we could take a break after this second round, and I'll work with Gita on those concerns. But again, I thank you for the panel.
Thank you, Senator Tidegui. This completes the first round of questions. We'll move now to the second round of questions, beginning with Senator Moylan, Senator Duenas, Senator Torres, Senator Perez, Senator Brown, Senator Talahi, Senator Blas, Senator Tidegui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I don't have any questions, and appreciate it if we can have a little bit of a recess so we can work on these amendments.
Absolutely. We'll go ahead and take a recess before we Move now to, this completes round 2. One round remains. That round again is for amendments and closing remarks. We'll take a short recess to allow for the preparation of some amendments before we move to the final round. Okay, we are back from recess now. We are on round 3, which is the round for amendments and any comments, final comments. The first amendment we have is to, it's AB 259 TMT TTT 13 through 17 P6 COTW. Lines 13 through 17, page 6. Senator Titagui, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, lines 13 to 17, page 6, which, with the recommendation of Gita, the inclusion after affordable is amended to include now the income threshold established herein may be adjusted by Gita from time to time through an approved board resolution consistent with the recommendations of the Guam Housing and Urban Renewal Authority and/or federal agencies included but are not limited to the U.S. Department of Housing, Urban Development, other words known as HUD, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is to ensure that what is considered affordable is done with templates and equations to determine that middle ground versus low income. So at the recommendation of some of my colleagues here who was concerned about the meaning of affordable. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titagui. Anyone on this amendment? If not, Senator Titagui, you may close. Are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. Next amendment is Bill 259 JB and TTT L9 through 16 P8 COTW. This is lines 9 through 16 of page 8, proffered by Senator Brown and Senator Titagui. Senator Brown, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make that amendment on page 8, as you said, lines 9 through 16 with regards to multiple family dwellings, and I'll just read it. It contains 3 or more dwelling units. A dwelling unit shall be defined as 1 or more rooms and a single kitchen, designed as a unit for occupancy by one family for living and sleeping purposes. For the purpose of this article, a duplex, townhomes, apartments, or condominium shall be considered a multiple family dwelling. A hotel shall not be considered a multiple family dwelling unless the developer intends to, and this is a change, intends to substantially renovate the hotel for use for elderly housing. So that is my proposed amendment, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Anyone on the amendment? If there's no one on the amendment, Senator Brown, would you like to close? If not, are there any objections to this amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on AB 259 VAA TTT 12 through 26, page 11, COTW. This is proffered by V. Anthony Atta and Tello Titagui. This is lines 12 through 26 of page 11. Senator Atta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, at the recommendation of Gita, that the verbiage of up to 100% be included there, so that's just not a 100% business privilege tax abatement. And then also the other part there was lining out exemption and inserting abatement to keep it consistent. And then also on number 2 there, it was also changed to up to, 3 up to, and 4 also up to, keeping that so that the abatements or the on those issues could be up to 75 or 100% and not exactly at 100. It gives them that flexibility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Atta. On the amendment? If there's no one on the amendment, Senator Atta, you may close. If not, are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We are now on the amendment to Bill 259 FBJ and JPT L13 through 15, page 12, COTW, proffered by Senator Frank Bloss Jr. and Jose Pito Trelahi, lines 13 through 15 of page 12. Senator Bloss, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, what this amendment basically do is strike out the language found on page 12, lines 13 to 15, which says the authority shall have up to 30 days from the submittal of a completed application to approve or deny a completed QC application pursuant to this article. There was some concern and question as to whether or not 30 days was sufficient so that we can give the authority the ample time to be able to basically provide the due diligence in the application processes, remove that 30-day window, and if the authority can do it within 30 days, great. If not, they need a little bit more. It just gives them that flexibility. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Bloss. Anyone on the amendment? Senator Bloss? Are there any objections to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We now have the final amendment, AB 259 SFP TTT L21 through 25, page 12, COTW, proffered by Senator Sabina F. Perez and Tello T. Taitegui, lines 21 through 25 of page 12. Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the amendment states basically what it does. It strikes out the 30-day requirement to have GITA establish fees, and I guess the reason is that they meet every month, and so 30 days may not be sufficient to establish that, because normally when you have these meetings, there's a proposal on the table, and then it has to be researched and then discussed. So 30 days is a little too short a time to establish the fees.
Thank you, Senator Perez. Anyone on this amendment? Senator Taitegui.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no objection to this amendment. I do realize that GITA said 30 days might be too short to establish the fees for this special qualifying certificate pursuant to this article. However, I think that if we don't put a time frame on this, Mr. Chair, that there might be, it just leaves them open to whenever they want to do it, and I'm concerned about that. So I'd like to make an amendment to the amendment, if I can.
Please proceed.
Yeah, the amendment, the authority shall establish fees of qualifying to this article no later than 60 days.
Okay, so this, will it read, the authority shall have no more than 60 days from the enactment of this act to establish fees for the special qualifying certificate?
Yes, so then I would have to, see, this is where I may need some legal advice how to move forward on this. Can I take just a real quick short
We'll take a short recess. Okay, we're back from a short recess. Senator Titlegy, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I think the fees is a separate action taken from the whole program itself on the rules and regulations for the special QC. So I think as the process goes, they will incorporate these fees at the same time. So if not, then I'll be following through to make sure they're doing this. So I appreciate it. So I'll withdraw my amendment to the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Titlegy. On the amendment, on the motion to withdraw first. Any objection to the motion to withdraw the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. Now on the amendment by Senator Perez. Anyone on the amendment? If not, Senator Perez, you may close. If not, are there any objections to this amendment? Seeing none, motion carries. We've exhausted all of the amendments for this round, but at this time, of course, everyone still has the ability to speak on the measure. This is the final round. Madam Speaker, Senator Torres, Senator Perez, Senator Brown, Senator Atta, Senator Terlahi, Senator Bloss. Okay, Senator Titlegy, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues that stuck it out through something as important as this. I mean, this will go down in history as we start to see these facilities, at least a facility, if anything, that comes up to take care of our Manamku, our aging population. But in closing, Mr. Chair, I introduced Bill 259 a few months ago to authorize tax incentives for developers for elderly residential living accommodations. Increasing the inventory of our Manamku's homes is one thing. Developing elderly housing that is secure and provides the level of care needed by our Manamku is significant. A community where our Manamkus can live and age in place. Mr. Chair, I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Amanda Shelton, Senator Sabina Pérez, Senator Joanne Brown, Senator Frank Bloss Jr., and Senator Jose Pito Terlahi for joining me as co-sponsors of this critical piece of legislation. And I humbly ask my colleagues to support this legislation. I also like to take a moment to recognize someone who worked very hard on this piece of legislation. It was the last piece of work he worked on, Mr. Roland Villaverde. We all know him as a pioneer for many legislations that this body has passed. And this was his last piece of work he did. And I just wanted to recognize him and thank him for all his hard work. And that being said, Mr. Chair, I dedicate this legislation to him. And I move to place Bill 259 as amended to the third reading file. But I believe I need to correctly say this, and that is, Mr. Chair, I move to rise from the Committee of the Whole with a recommendation that Bill number 259-36 LS, as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, Energy, Utilities, and the Arts, and further amended in the Committee of the Whole, be placed on the third reading file.
On that motion, are there any objections? Seeing none, motion carries.
right. We're back from the Committee of the Whole. Senator Rajel, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report back to the body after the deliberation on Bill number 259-36 LS as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, and Energy Utilities and the Arts, and further amended in the Committee of the Whole with the recommendation of the Committee of the Whole to place on the third reading file.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Acting Majority Leader, Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that we go back to motions.
On the motion to go back to motions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're on motions. Senator Rajel, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to add to the session agenda a bill that was on our agenda as a potential item, Bill number 191-36 COR as amended by the Committee on Economic Development, Agriculture, Power, Energy, Utilities, and the Arts, an act to amend subsection 3402 of Article 4, Chapter 3, Division 1, Title 9, Guam Administrative Rules and Regulations relative to allowing wild deer to be taken and harbored as livestock to the session agenda.
On that motion to add Bill number 191-36 to the session agenda, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. Senator Rajel, you are recognized.
Also, Madam Speaker, I'd just like to make a note that I do plan to move the other bill that I had that's on the session agenda as a potential item, and that is Bill number 333-36 COR, an act to add a new item D to subsection 401092 and to add a new item 6 to subsection 40118, both of the Guam Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act Title 10 Guam Code annotated relative to cannabis content in edible and cosmetic cannabis products. I'm planning on making that motion as soon as it clears the Committee on Rules. My understanding is that the bill is with the Committee on Rules pending final clearance, and as soon as that clears, I plan on making that motion to add that bill to the agenda.
All right, thank you, Senator Rajel. Are there any other motions? If not, then we will stand in recess until 2 p.m.